Our guest tonight is Singapore-based Mitali Chakravarty, the founder-editor of Borderless Journal. So it is a literary journal to connect all writers and readers beyond the bonds of money, nationality, rituals, and cultures to a world of ideals, humor, poetry, prose. There are no boundaries to human imagination and thought, and that is what Mitali's journal sets out to explore. Before we embark on this journey across borders, let me introduce Mitali. Mitali has done her master's in English literature from Delhi University, journalism in Times Research Foundation of India, and won a postgraduate fellowship from Oslo University for Economic Development Studies. She has worked in the Times of India and much later as the editor in Kitab. She has been published widely in anthologies, newspapers, and many online forums. She is also a translator. She translates from Bengali and Hindi. She has written a book of essays on China, where she spent 8 years of her life, called In the Land of Dragons. So welcome, Mitali. And how's Singapore? Is it warm? Is it?
It is muggy. It rains a lot now.
Okay.
It's officially the rainy season. And though you don't know when it doesn't rain here. And today's supposed to be a cold day. So cold days here would go to 20 something and hot days would go to 30 something. 33 to 23, that's the rough range. But it's a warm world.
So recently I read a post where you said that Borderless Journal is looking for humor for its forthcoming issue. And you wrote that while many feel sad looking at world events, COVID-19, climate change, impacts like floods and storms and forest fires, lack of a coherent world leadership, we all feel the need to laugh, to celebrate, to feel joyful distress. Okay, so tell us more about Borderless Journal and the kind of things that you're looking for in your journal across borders.
Actually, Borderless is a journal that looks across all borders. It's in a virtual world, so we don't really need to regard any border. What I found in my journey as a writer who does little reviews and little things here and there was that most journals define a place or a time or something like that. So in Borderless, we have rolling submissions. There is, man has created all these artificial borders of religion, borders of nations. I mean, there were no nations earlier. You think of it. Pre-industrial revolution, there were no nations and there were no borders. People could just walk across. Yeah, Marco Polo did need some kind of paperwork done when he walked across to China with his dad. But, it wasn't like now that you need a passport and a visa and this paper and that paper. So it was really borderless. Publishers have a lot of borders now, even though the virtual world has nothing. So when you have a book published in US, getting it into India, I discovered this with my own books. Getting it into India or Singapore bookshops is really a problem, So they have these. So here I wanted to create a platform which would get all writers across borders. I mean, it wouldn't be just Asian, wouldn't be just American, wouldn't be just Singaporean, but just writers across all borders who would gather together and have a place to put their writing forward. Also, I found that there were a lot of boundaries drawn in terms of marginalized communities in writing. Like in England, you have the BAME, and they there's writing for blacks and writing for women and writing for this. So I felt that there were so many borders that did not make sense to, really have this kind of a, I mean, it was difficult to write. You wrote a story, you didn't have a place to send it to. So I wanted a forum where you could have stories which are stories which are fun, which are not written aimed at anything depressing, but aimed towards creating a humanitarian society. So I would not, like we have a children's section too. That is in fact run by this organization called Book Osmia, which has been much written about in India by Hindu, by Indian Express. And they gather writing from all over the world in a similar spirit. So there are two levels of running a magazine. One is the reader has to find it interesting. The other is the writers need to present. And the other thing that I find very interesting is publishers keep giving out that content of certain kinds doesn't interest readers. Like if it's a clean story, it may not interest a reader. Is that really true? So when I run a magazine like Borderless, I ask for non-explicit. I ask for non-explicit writing. I don't see these as borders, because you see, there are two kinds of borders. One is the borders drawn by mankind, and the others is the openness with which you can share. So today, when I was a kid, you used to have not when I was a kid, even before that, there was this magazine called Shandesh, brought out by Satyajit Ray's family. So they would have all children of all ages. Reader's Digest, when I was a kid, had people from top to bottom, people would find reading material, even Illustrated Weekly, Whereas now reading has become very, like there's children's, there's women's, there's this. So this is in a way an attempt to create that holistic thing in a virtual world so that we can draw the best from all countries and best from all over the world. I mean, I don't want to use the word countries because that's again a border defined by the Industrial Revolution. I mean, by now we should be looking at a new world order. We should not be thinking of what was fed to us many years ago for the reason of trade. I mean, you think of literature like, Asimov and all. They have gone into a world where each planet is ruled like a country. So I think at some point we have to think of moving towards something more holistic than having nations, poor nations, rich nations, developed, undeveloped. While I was studying in Oslo, there were things that I discovered which I did not like at all. I was shown that Singapore's development was not okay because it was, I had this lecturer, I don't want to take his name, but what he showed us was that Singapore had inequitable life, and therefore, it did not develop properly. He showed slums with long, tall buildings. I moved to Singapore in 1991. Yes, I've been out of Singapore for 8 years, 9 years, like that. But, I've lived here. I'm a Singaporean. I found that here, I have to date not seen things like that. The pictures he showed me were probably from the 1960s or 70s. Is a wrong way to judge a country. I mean, every country has to have their own developmental model. And in that spirit, Borderless gives the space to the writers to give their own thought, their own models, undefined by boundaries created by the West or by the East or by any genre of literature. I have a section called Musings, which is half essay and half biography. It's very popular. Everybody likes to write for musings. I pick only a few, but I get a lot of musings. So it's a kind of, when I was in Times of India, we used to have this literary page on which I used to write regularly. under Chandan Mitra. It was like way. So I used to write on things like sneezing and all that, funny pieces. And he would actually have the thing published and all that. So, and I really enjoyed doing those pieces. So I have that. So, which is why I've asked for humor, because last couple of weeks ago, I saw some beautiful stuff from a poet called Vatsala Radhakisun. She's a Mauritius poet. She's written, published in Borderless earlier, but she's published widely. She had written a nonsense verse. And I was telling her that, so why can't we have that? And she said, no, I don't really do that. I write serious poetry. I said, okay, let's have one issue. On one side, we'll have serious stuff. It's near Independence Day, South Asia, major divisions, all that. We have that. And on the other hand, we have this, just humor, just fun. So anybody can send in anything spoofy. So I don't know how it will be, because the call is just given a couple of days ago and I haven't really gone into the stuff. So I'll go into it next week and know how spoofy it is. So that is basically the idea with which I gave the call. But Borderless is actually just above publishing borders, above borders of countries, borders of religion, borders of all kinds drawn by man. But we have certain things that define us so that everybody can read it. Non-explicit writing, no usage of bad language. I don't believe that gives power to poetry or literature. I think it's just taking a shortcut, because there are words to express everything in any language. We also run translations. So I get some fantastic writing from Balochistan regularly. And I have some lovely poetry translated by Aditya Shankar, and I have more upcoming by this guy called Ravi Shankar Rash. His poetry, he's also given some translations. And I think I'm going to get some Bengali translation also this time for the partition thing. So, we have all kinds of things coming in, and I'm fine with everything provided you have permission. I mean, if you give me a translation where you don't have permission, I wouldn't use it. But it is really borderless, and I fit it into some category or the other. So that is how it goes.
Actually, today we are talking about one category. We are talking about why women write. So, do you think we even need to discuss why women write, or why women don't
I think so. I think so. I mean, you are yourself a woman, and you're an award-winning journalist based in Northeast India. You work for India Today, Telegraph, Tehelka, and now you edit Thumbprint. You've received Wash Media Awards, Ramnath Goenka Excellence Award in Journalism for 2 consecutive years. Wow. And for reporting on J&K and Northeast. And you have this Ladli Media Award for gender sensitivity, Sanskriti Award for Excellence in Journalism, and the 7th Sarojini Naidu Prize 2007 for Best Reporting on Panchayati Raj by the Hunger Project. You've been on the Power List of Femina magazine in 2012, and you've written 3 books. One of them being The Mothers of Manipur, and the other Bulletproof, which was also reviewed by Navina Das for Kitab, while I was the editor on it. So as a writer, do you think it made a difference to you being a woman writer? Did you write because you're a woman? I mean, women's writing is what? What would you say? Would you say you wrote all this because you were a woman and got all these awards because you were a woman?
No,
women's writing.
Now you're posing that question to me. Well,
okay, I will answer it, but I just want to hear your perspective.
Actually, I won't call myself a writer. I'm a journalist. So I'm a hardcore journalist. And you would say, do women make better journalists or men make better journalists? I would say you can only be a good journalist or a bad journalist. But your gender does come into play. When when you think about I report from one of the most underreported regions of the world, and that is where I've written down my experiences in the book Bulletproof. So when I have to go to inaccessible areas without any kind of support system, without any kind of security, I've done that. But now when I think of it, and that is, and when I have to, you have to be at a place where you are on your own, and there are certain things like, where do you go? You have to go to the toilet, or even for that matter, many media houses in small cities and towns, they don't have a separate toilet for women, nor do they have the provision of maternity leave for women. So these are things, when you think about those things, you realize that yes, your gender comes into play. Many women have to drop out midway, many women journalists, because they are not able to cope with, if they get pregnant, they have to leave. So when you think on those, about those things, your gender does come into play. And and maybe we have an advantage sometimes. I mean, we can just get into places where men can't, like we can just enter the kitchen and talk to the women. So I feel that I feel that we have been I don't think that I have been I've got these awards just because I'm a woman, but there are many who have not been as fortunate as I have been. So many of them had to drop out. There's a lot of lack, because of lack of infrastructure, lack of security, especially when you are talking about small cities and towns. I'm talking about journalists, and even about women in science. Women in science, they drop out. They can't continue pursue pure science, because that is the age when they have to get married, they have to have children. They can't spend long hours in the laboratory. So these are things, when you think about those things, you realize that yes, your gender does come into play. And as Virginia Woolf had said, that you need a space of your own to be able to write. And that space also means not just a physical space, but that mental space, that support system, which is often missing. There are very few who have that, are fortunate enough to get that space.
Okay. I actually have grown up in a home where my mother was a doctor, and she did not stop because she had me. So I was left with my grandparents, and my father went off to England when I was 3 months, and my mother when I was 6 months. And I also have never done anything because I have been stopped. So at a personal level, I cannot quite see that, it affected me. But on the other hand, there is this whole, to me, there's this critic who says that, since you said this was going to be the subject, I did look it up a little bit, and I came across this very interesting statement by this feminist literary critic from the 20th century, who said that women's writing sounds like an intellectual measuring of bust and hips. And I personally feel that when you say women's writing as a genre, it is actually that. How is it different from men's writing? Gone are the days in India where education for a woman was seen as akin to widowhood. My great-grandmother lived in those times, but despite that, she rode horses and spoke 7 languages. So, a highly educated woman. Gone are the days when Mary Ann Evans wrote under the male name of George Eliot, right? That doesn't happen anymore. Unless you're going through a gender surgery and want to change your name, you wouldn't be doing that. Gone are the days when to think or write was seen as unwomanly. You see it all the time in writing like Jane Austen and all that, Then why should we look at women's writing as anything separate from men's writing? So that would be my number one question for this. Today I was telling my elder son, who's 23 and studying in the university and all that I'm talking of, we are going to have a discussion on this in the evening. And he said, but Mama, I don't buy a book seeing whether it's a man or woman. I buy a book because I want to read it, looking at the content. So I think we have a heritage of a patriarchal society and all that. And probably since I am doing an anthology with about 33 women writers on, on this issue, I think the reason I started doing this was not so much because I felt women can't write or women can't speak, but because when I was in New Delhi last year, my father had passed on and I had gone to settle property matters in November. And I was staying with my uncle and aunt. And on the TV was blaring the story of this Hyderabad vet who was raped and burnt. That left me feeling very raw. Then I came back and I write a lot of poetry based on rape, In fact, I went into online publishing last year looking at rape incidents, and I have about 40, 50 pieces on things, on different social issues. Some of them are rape as well. So that was the 8-year-old girl who was raped in Kashmir. So then I felt that there is a very large, you see, we belong to the privileged mass. So I feel as most of us writers who are sitting here today in this thing, we are very privileged. So we don't need that part of women's writing. But we need to help these people speak up and come out of the patriarchal society that is destroying them. And we still have a very much a patriarchal mindset, even in a middle-class family like this. I was living in China, and it was like a mini United Nations. We had people from all over the world, foreigners, Laowai on one side and Chinese on the other. You can say it was pretty much divided up like that because they couldn't speak our language. We were also handicapped. I mean, if you speak Mandarin too, they can figure out you're not you don't look it. So out there, I had this friend from US. She was a Catholic, and she married a Protestant, protesting her family and all that. Her family threw her out. She used to come regularly with a black patch on her eyes every now and then. And I wondered, one day I asked her, what happened to you? And she said, I just fell down, had an accident. Then eventually we got to know that her husband beat her. So if the desert was not right, she would get beaten. So this is not just the story in India, it's all over. Out of all my friends, European friends living there, at least 4 or 5 lost their husbands to Chinese women. And I don't think it's just the women's fault. It is also the men. So, it's not the men, just that the women, why are the men willing to get seduced? So you have that at that level. And some of the men turn violent, all over the world. So it is to protest that violence, that patriarchal mindset that is objectifying us to the point that when a woman is growing older, the man goes and marries a younger woman. That is not okay. So this is to protest that. I mean, we are doing just South Asia because you can't possibly do all of the world together. Every area has different issues. I mean, here you have things, Pakistan, you have things like Hudud Ordinance, honor killing. India, you even had Sati up to the 1980s. We have that, in fact. Then we have Nirbhaya. Nirbhaya, mind you, I see it as a very positive thing that happened eventually. I mean, the rape and all was very sad, but people took courage from that and they learned to protest and get justice for it. I mean, they changed the rape law. So that was, I think, a big thing. So you had all these things happening. So to voice out this, to show awareness, to give courage to women. I have a girl who's written about a first-hand experience of molestation as a child, and it's ugly. But she's written it. So the very fact that she wrote it, it was like a emotional I would say, release for her, but it took her very long. For each essay for us, when we write poetry, it takes some time. But when a person is doing a fiction, it takes some time again, but it's a fiction. But when you are doing a real essay, a real life reporting, I have done reports. You have done reports. And you are doing a report based entirely on this. It is so much more harrowing. I mean, I have had I have about 10 reports like that. And I have had every writer come back to me and tell me it is taking us time because emotionally it is very difficult to handle. And these are not always first-hand accounts. It's only one first-hand account. The rest of them are all repeats. Like they are telling other stories. They've done case studies. They've done this thing. So it can be. So I think to be able to speak up for all this in itself, all together, voice it out, shout it out, saying, look, we have the courage to say it. We can change the world. That is very important. For me, I don't know. I started publishing after 20 years, I did not publish between 1992 and 2014. Yeah, there was some online stuff that the international school in China used to ask me to report some events, do some things. So just that. And then I did a cookbook with a friend because she insisted. But I came back with a book of essays on bringing up children in China and on China and India, because I feel there were a lot of things about China India does not know. We have misconceptions. So I wrote the book keeping that in mind. And I had a beautiful stay there. So the thing is that, I personally ended up feeling that to be a woman, to be able to go and adapt, I don't know, for me, having a career is not very important. Being famous is not important. But to me, coming back to a world, I came back into publishing because I started realizing that I have to help my kids live in a better world than we are living now. So I came back with the idea to create a space in literature, which is why I started Borderless Journal, that we have good literature. A lot of literature was going into very bleak and dark areas and becoming almost unreadable. I mean, frankly, I hate dystopian fiction. So all the fiction that was coming out was, by and large, in bookshops, you'd see dystopian or silly romances. So, you need a middle path. So I was actually, that is where Borderless would come in. And I myself write in that sense. I mean, I have 2 novels, one which are on the run, and they are also, one is about partition, which is a subject that, I have translated around that and has made an impact on me. But I found that even in novels, I have women, my heroines are very independent. I mean, they couldn't care less for the rest of the world. They would just, throw it aside. So coming from a privileged, educated background in India, I think that is something that happens to a lot of us. I mean, today when I am writing because I'm a human, I'm a mom, wife, and homemaker, and I write because it's like breathing to me. Not because I'm a woman or I have to say a woman's thing, but writing is like breathing. I mean, if I don't write, I am crotchety, irritable, I cannot cope. But similarly, I have a mission to make a better world. So, but a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed this writer in Instagram. He's done this book again with Penguin on the other side of the divide. I don't know if you've read it. He's an editor in Hindustan Times. I think assistant editor, senior assistant editor, or something like that. Samir Rashad Khatlani. And in his book, he wrote a dedication to his son, saying he wants to make a better South Asia for his son to grow up in. He's a Kashmiri, and he wrote about his visit to Pakistan during the Aman Yatra. So these are things which I found, it was exactly the reason I was writing. That when I write seriously, it is to make a better world for my children, not for any other reason, not for being a woman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talking about children, you also have Borderless has a children's section. So why do you think is it important to nurture children's literature?
You see, children's literature is very important because they're the writing of tomorrow and the readers of tomorrow, to help them develop a good taste. If I have children attached to Borderless now, 20 years ago, if they follow it, I have a fairly young readership. I had a, don't tell anyone, but a 16-year-old girl wrote a fantastic story and I carried it in the adult section without informing anyone. But it was really good. You should take a look at it. She's called Pranati Gulyani. Really good story. If you go to our Facebook page, it's the second or the third one. So but these are the kids who are going to be writing tomorrow. So what are they writing? What is it they are doing? And I think writers to an extent are visionaries. So if you if you are a visionary, you are looking at a future world. You think of all the writers, Jules Verne, even I would say somebody like Tagore, Nazrul, they've all looked beyond their times. One poet who I keep quoting in my poetry, Lalon, he was a fakir, in the 18th, 19th century. And there was a Bengali movie, Moner Manush, about him. So he actually, all of them actually had a, very humanistic and forward-looking outlook, which somewhere along the way has got lost in literature. And that is something you have to get the youngsters in touch with. So I have a lot of writers, young writers who write to me, early 20s and all that. I have a lot of them in Borderless. So I have that lot and I have the mature lot. And the mature lot, I have fantastic writers like Santosh Bakaya, Nishi Pulugutta. They write very humanitarian pieces with a lot of emotion, lot of feelings, and there is nothing explicit. So from an 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, you could read their writing and enjoy it. So that is the kind of writing I look for in Borderless. So when I am nurturing the children, I'm not doing that. Actually, Book Osmia does, but we have similar aims. So unfortunately, Nidhi, the Book Osmia founder, she wanted to be here, but she had a children's event this evening. So she and Archana couldn't be here. They'll see the video later. But they actually pick writers, and through COVID, they have actually provided a platform to all the children to express themselves. And the children, sometimes the writing you come across, it is really amazing how mature the children are. We can learn from them. Child is the father of man. Wordsworth said that. So you actually feel that looking at that. So, which is why I feel nurturing young writers and readers, helping them develop the right taste is very important. I mean, if you're just going to read, what do they call those comics? I love Marvel movies, but that is not the thing. But you have those Japanese ninja, what are they called? Manga comics and things where people have a, very bleak outlook towards life. There are some very positive things in our world that we have created because we are social beings, like a family unit. It is taking away from that, and that creates depression, darkness. Children take their lives. Children get addicted to a world which is not real. They cannot make the difference between the real and the non-real section. So then at the end of the day, it is a very, I mean, if you just let them be, and I mean, if you don't define their, see, what happened was when my son was very young and he was just starting to read, I was volunteering in Singapore as a storyteller, and I used to read stories in National Library, and in fact, I got an award from the President of Singapore in 2002 for that. But what I used to do is to help children develop a taste for reading. From the age group of 4 to 8, the kids would come and have a half an hour session with me every week. And what I would do with them was to get them interested in a particular theme. So we'd say fire engine. And I put books on fire engines. And then we would go like a fire engine, running all over the room, stopping fires. Then we'd sit down and read because they have lesser attention spans. So you have to give them activity while reading. So otherwise they can't sit and read at a stretch. My son was like that. I remember when he was in kindergarten, once he got lesser marks. He got very good in counting. They used to have very good, excellent, good, satisfactory. So he got a very good in counting. Then I went and asked his teacher. He couldn't count 1 to 100. I was a bit surprised because at home he used to jump and count them. She said he could very well, but he was running and jumping and I required him to sit down. So I gave him a very good instead of excellent. But that energy, that the ability to do multitask like that while studying, I think is an important thing, which if we can retain through our lives, like you were saying, you need a place to write. I personally don't agree. I feel you can write anywhere. When I go for a walk on the beach, I sit and write poetry on my home phone, like on my own, my mobile. So we do this kind of, so I don't think that is so necessary, a space to write, if you can multitask. I have written poetry which got published in anthologies and stuff while cooking, So I've been cooking and I've been writing. Both the activities I enjoy immensely. So I don't see the problem that people have in that sense. And I personally feel that this is something that we should encourage in youngsters to have that ability and to overcome. I mean, after all, the human race is progressing. And if you think of it, we have to intellectually progress. If we have to progress intellectually, tell me if I'm overshooting the time.
No, I just, in fact, I was just wondering, because we were talking about the libraries and reading habits. I just wanted you to quickly tell us, how is it in Singapore and India? In India, the concept of public libraries seem to be dying. We hardly go to our public libraries. I'm talking about small cities and towns. And I don't know, these storytelling sessions, these are things which are, I think they are being revived now by certain communities, some groups. But how is it in Singapore? Do people go to bookshops? Do people go to libraries?
Actually, yes, people do go to bookshops and libraries, but it is the younger people who read. The older people, most of them would not be reading. You have to see, historically, Singapore came up in the 1960s because Malaysia did not want them there, right? There was this thing. So when it came up here, people worked very hard. There was no time for literature at that point. People had to put the place together. The river that is so beautiful now, Singapura, it was a mess. So there was a river cleanup in 1970. So people were busy building the nation and earning money. Now almost everybody has a home. There are a few homeless, but those are for other reasons, not always for poverty. It could be for other reasons, like they've been thrown out because the child went to jail, the family won't accept them. So and there are halfway homes, but sometimes the kids don't want to go to halfway homes. So there you have issues like that, but that's different. So they had all this. So then the government consciously, I think, started education was a high priority with them. So they consciously started putting children in through schooling and all that. And they built these libraries, which in the 90s were really beautiful. But now they've become more online, and the choice of books is not always good. Though last time they asked me for a list of 70 books from National Library. I gave them, I'm not sure they got them. So I have found the virtual world easier. I mean, you go to Gutenberg, you get books. But Singapore, there is still a culture. Today, we were just going somewhere. Here it's in the unlockdown mode. And there was actually a crowd outside a local library. There are libraries in every area. And I think they might be having some storytelling now, but I did not find any avenues after I came back from China. I was in China for 8 years. After I came back in 2014, I found that I could not, locate the kind of thing I was doing earlier. So that has probably got integrated into the school curriculum. That is my guess. I used to also run things in schools. So, things get integrated, things change, they move. But what has happened is most people can read. Here, even if you talk to a taxi driver, he is very often very well read. So the distinction you see among people is much lesser because they've had that. They will take their kids to the library. I used to work with kids who came from non-English speaking background, which meant most of them would be from backgrounds which were not well-to-do. But you had actually mothers queuing up and fighting to get them in. So whereas in India, I think education, as far as I have seen, it is only a priority among the educated. Even among the non-educated, it is really still earning the basic bread. I mean, how many migrant labor really send their children to schools, leave alone libraries? That is more an issue we need to address. How many migrant labor have their homes, as opposed to in Singapore, where every migrant labor is given a shelter and there is full accounting. Of course, the argument is it's much smaller, but even if it's smaller, I think when they are building a building, they should look into giving them some kind of temporary shelter, and they shouldn't be living in drain pipes and without sanitation. So, and without sanitation is a truth all over India. So I think only after we resolve that can we look at libraries and education. To me, I mean, the curve is like that. So
no, whatever,
and
because
I'm
whatever
passionate
the
about
existing libraries, they are so dismal and cold that people don't want to go there. I mean, except if you
Actually,
want
I
to do
remember I
research, if
used
you are
to,
researching on
yeah,
something, you're doing a PhD, you have to go to a library, you go. Otherwise, you don't
you
go
pick
and
up a book and
enjoy.
come out.
You don't go and
No, actually,
enjoy.
I used to go to British Council and American Center in the 80s. But I found the Delhi University library, like you said, dismal. And even I used to go to this other library in, in the theater arts place, then ICCR, all of them. I mean, you can't really go, and I don't know if ICCR has improved now, but I used to go to, when I was doing reports and all that for Times of India, I used to go there. So that, it was not the nicest place to sit and spend time in. Whereas here, when you go to a library, it is actually very beautifully done up. And you have people there are some old people there, they spend the day reading newspapers. So, there are all these things going on, and that is very true. I mean, this culture is here, but it's really nurtured by the government, heavily nurtured.
That is something which is missing in India. And
But
okay, before we we are running out of time, so
yeah,
let's talk about Mitali the poet. Tell us
Mitali the
about your
poet
yeah.
started writing at 8 years old poetry. I had a little cat, it was very fat and an expert at catching rats. No, I had a little cat, it was called Little Pat. it was very fat and an expert at catching rats. That got me a first prize in a poetry competition. And after that, I decided I would write poetry. And then I started writing poetry, and I started writing poetry, and I haven't stopped. So even the 20 years I didn't publish, I wrote. But what I publish now is more not because I want to publish poems, but because I feel something needs to be said. So when you have poetry, you actually, it's in a very, when you do a report or a story, you kind of spread out the words. As a writer, you know, it's like a big spread, and you build it up and you use words like that. But in a poetry, it's a concentrated, focused emotion where you just build up that one emotion. And you focus on that particular thing and link everything to it. So very often when I'm writing of a social issue, I will bring in literature with it. I will bring in history with it, and or other poetry with it, past, present. Recently I did something called Erasing History. That was basically poetry to condemn the vandalism on statues and buildings. I don't think it's right to do that. You cannot erase history. You should learn from history. You cannot erase it. I mean, if you break a statue, it is not going to do anything to you. So that would be something. I have written an essay also on it in Countercurrents, but I also have poetry. So I
Would
do
you
it
like
in
to
two
read out
ways.
something? Would you like to read out something?
Okay. Sure. What should I read out? This poem I have called Marginalized, which is why we should not have, which basically is the ideology of why we don't need women's literature, we don't need something called women separate, men separate, brings out that.
Okay.
Let me read that to you. So it's I wrote it in March and it was published then. It's called Marginalized. Marginalized. Who said we are marginalized? We are humans walking side by side, women, men, and children, Dalits, tribals, and the abused. Who said we are different? Who said that woman is born of man's rib? Who said caste is by God writ? Who said woman cannot enter temple or mosques? Who said menstruation and widowhood are both to be abhorred? Who made these rules? Did Durga menstruate? Did Kali? Did Mary have a husband before she conceived Christ? Who created religions and rites? Who made castes and borderlines? Who created these and why? Radcliffe for Manchester Mills drew a line that split homes, created the Great Divide. Corpses without heads rolling on trains of death, burnt, decapitated. Zombies looking for blood. Zombies rising out of the death of love. Zombies that cannot tolerate, zombies that hate. They no longer think, but kill. Kill for cows. Kill for country. Kill for dowry. Kill for concealing rape. Kill in the name of different gods. Who made these different gods? Who? Who? Was it me or you? Marginalized? Who said we are marginalized? We are humans walking side by side, singing a song of love. Love that will smile our differences aside. Love that will claim we are all the same, born to live and die, guided by an unknown light, an energy pulsating through our veins called life. So it's just that I summed up a whole bunch of issues. Like I said, it's very concentrated. So you sum up a whole bunch of issues and you bring in the positive thing that could heal all these. So historically, the concept of marginalization, the concept of differences created, countries, because people said, this is mine and you are different and I'm different. My language is different. My dress is different. So we have to live different. So they did that. Then they started killing each other over that. Then they killed for dowry. They killed for rape. They killed for different gods. So everything is a reason to kill. So that is basically just breeding hatred. So, and against that, if we stop thinking like that and we think we can tolerate and each other's differences, learn to revel in our colors, like we revel in a rainbow's color, then we will not have, then we will not, really have any issues left in the world. We can just move ahead instead of talking of women's writing, feminism, Dalits, blacks. I mean, you have so much. Then you have laborers who are not under any of this. They're just farmers, laborers, So you can get rid of all that if you think of it in the long term. But that is just an idea. So I just put it out like a poem, a concentrated essay.
Yeah, it's a lovely thought.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
It was lovely talking to you. I wish we could go on and on, but time is ticking away. And
sure.
Hope we catch up again someday. And let's hope.
I'm hoping to do an interview with you in writing for Borderless at some point.
And I just hope Borderless grows and we have a borderless world one day. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, I really hope that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.